Businesses and local authorities in the Garden Route are now planning to challenge government's decision to shut down its beaches for the entire festive season. President Cyril Ramaphosa on Monday declared the municipality a coronavirus hotspot and in fact announced similar restrictions in the ones imposed on Nelson Mandela Bay in the Eastern Cape. Since this announcement, almost 80% of accommodation bookings have been cancelled. Booysen is the executive mayor of the Garden Route municipality and joins us now live from Plettenberg Bay via our video link. Mr. Booysen, thanks for your time. Welcome to the AM report this morning. It's quite a staggering figure, isn't it? 80% of those bookings cancelled. Help us understand what this actually translates to in terms of monetary terms.
Morning, Ayana, and morning to our viewers. It is indeed a devastating blow to the Garden Route economy as a whole. So much so that just yesterday at close of business, we received reports that more than 400 establishments had to close their doors in terms of people who have cancelled. And at that stage, just in the George vicinity alone, we were sitting at revenue loss at more than 3.8 million rand. And that number is still growing. And we know that there's going to be ripple effects because now employment opportunities are also lost in that process.
Yeah, no doubt these are the sort of things you're going to be citing if your challenge of the government's regulations do land up in court. Now that we've recorded about 10,000 cases, perhaps if it hasn't sunk in, it's likely to, for many people who had, call it reservations about a second wave. Does that alter your approach at all, given the figures we've seen in the last 24-hour cycle?
Firstly, the numbers have started to drop within the Western Cape. So we have turned the tide in terms of leveling the curve of active cases. And we were always also ready to deal with these active cases because we do have the medical staff on standby. We do have reserved frontline workers. And the biggest thing now for us is the fact that it is irrecoverable, the damage that has been caused thus far by this announcement. And we're not happy by the fact that we've been treated differently compared to what is happening in KwaZulu-Natal, for instance, whereas even in KwaZulu-Natal, there are active cases. So the decision is inconsistent and we're not going to be able to recover.
Well, you know, the idea of having some level of discrimination is actually one that is recommended as high up as the World Health Organization. Localized interventions was the advice, but perhaps, you know, even that can be contested. Let's speak about the bottom line, though. You will have to prove unequivocally that you do have a handle over the situation, and that will raise questions about how we got here to begin with. Are you able to explain how the Garden Route region ended up getting upwards of 22,000 cases, at least as of Monday? That figure undoubtedly might be significantly higher now that we're on Thursday.
Yes, Ayanda, indeed. We were sitting with just over 22,000 cases. But what we need to look at as well is that the number of recoveries, we're sitting with over 16,000 recoveries, and that is out of a population of more than 600,000. So in terms of numbers, that is relatively manageable. And we know that when you look at the percentage-wise, it would sound scary, but the what's actually happening on the ground is manageable.
And, you know, have you been able to gauge why there were perceptions that this might in fact be a hotspot region? I mean, of course, when the president made this announcement, I imagined there was a fair amount of introspection taking place to try to figure out where you may have gaps. Are you able to share with us now what you'll be doing differently, essentially, if government were to concede to some of the contention you have?
Ayanda, what came as a surprise to us is that we did have a visit by the National Minister, Dr. Mkhize, as well as the Provincial MEC, Dr. Mbombo. And we actually had site visits to the facilities and we had a walkabout in terms of our readiness. And at the time with them, everything was on board in terms of us having field hospitals, having quarantine and isolation sites, having spare beds available, having reserved oxygen canisters and oxygens for hospitals, and everything was impressive at the time. So, even at the time, the minister was relatively happy in terms of comparing us to what he has seen as an example in some parts of the Eastern Cape. We were way above in terms of readiness, and we still are. And this is the surprise to us, that we did not expect this announcement that we would be thrown under the bus in this manner.
Sure. There are talks, call it reports, of perhaps looking into the possibility of deploying the SANDF in an effort to influence public behavior, how communities respond to the pandemic. Is that something that you think would work in a place like the Garden Route region?
Initially, that is what we thought, because in our command centers, because SAPS are also represented, and they continued to hammer the fact that they are undercapacitated to deal with the issues which we would raise in the joint command centers. And because the SANDF were deployed previously, and they also reported to us that there are 150 SANDF members ready to be deployed in each and every province. And based on that, we thought that would work. But then when we now look back retrospectively, we then realized that it is not a good thing to conflate SAPS with SANDF duties. So we're no longer considering that option. It's a matter of SAPS stepping up to the plate, and then we working together with our own internal law enforcement. But the SANDF tends to blur the lines when they're on the ground, and we don't want what we have seen in the past. So we're no longer opting for that option.
You speak about the blurring of the lines and learning from history. If the past court cases, at least whilst challenging the National Coronavirus Command Council, are anything to go by, we know that arguments sometimes to do with the economic fallout of COVID-19, et cetera, don't often trump the interest of health, right? The public health concerns. On what basis are you, I guess, hoping that the courts will see things differently now? Because the sentiment I'm certainly getting from my standpoint is that the economic fallout is so devastating, and it is on that score that these regulations are problematic. But dare I say, it's an argument we've heard before, and an argument, in fact, that's failed to convince the courts otherwise.
Sorry, I missed you. We got cut off at some part.
Sure. No, essentially the thrust of my question.
Repeat your question.
Yeah, the thrust of my question is, we've heard the argument about the economic fallout being devastating before, and in those instances, the courts hasn't necessarily deemed it valid enough to lift regulations. On what basis are you hoping the courts will decide differently insofar as the Garden Route is concerned?
Ayanda, one of the problems which South Africa have not learned, especially at the national level, is that whenever they panic, they lock down. Lockdown is not the one-size-fits-all solution. And what we've been saying, and it has been proven in the Western Cape, that it's got to be a balancing act in terms of fighting COVID-19, the spread thereof, stimulating the economy, creating jobs. That is the crux of the matter. And we have illustrated that we can balance those aspects of the economy. And we're willing to continue with that. But at this stage and in this manner, we're just causing collateral damage. You cannot fight COVID-19 and at the same time, you're destroying livelihoods and you destroy businesses, especially SMMEs. And we're saying, let's balance this, because the spread of COVID-19 and the prevention thereof, it's a law enforcement matter. And we are willing to deal with the law enforcement issues, but we should not allow collateral damage. And this is what is happening in the Garden Route.
Interesting. Of course, Economics 101 tells us for businesses to thrive, supply needs to be met with demand. If people are cancelling their accommodation, one might speculate that part of the reason is because there's genuinely a drop in demand, not least of which because of what the president had to say in his last address. The 10,000 cases we've seen in the past 24-hour cycle are likely to add to that too. Is this perhaps not a far gone war, so to speak? I mean, it appears, at least on the site of it, that some people are opting for the safer option of being at home. So even if these restrictions are lifted, can't really guarantee that the revenue you're trying to make will in fact come through, can we?
No, revenue is never guaranteed, Ayanda, but the stepping stones and the starting blocks and the model, it's all about the model. And we're saying that the model should be allowed to work and it should be allowed to be tested. We cannot just go on stats and then just kill the goose that lays the golden egg. And this is what we're arguing here.
Right, and we'll see how it all pans out, a story we're certainly watching quite closely. Thanks very much for your time coming through to give us your take on the matter. Memory Booysen is the Garden Route Executive Mayor. We know, of course, the Garden Route municipality pushing back strongly against government's decision to declare it a hotspot region because it has certain ramifications, and one of those, of course, is hitting businesses quite hard.